Welcome to what seems to be on just about everybody's mind these days: mastering pricing during chaos. I can think of no better word than chaos for what I'm hearing from grocers across the nation. What I'm also hearing a lot of is the cry for help. And that's what we're here to do today. With me are two of the lead execs at ClearDemand. Sarah Stockton, who is Vice President Product Development, has 15 plus years experience in pricing and retail, and Steve Thornberry, Vice President Sales, with 25 years of experience working with both retailers and their suppliers to find advantages in data and analytics. Today's webinar is presented by ClearDemand, the leader in AI-driven price and promotion optimization for retailers. As you're going to see today, their platform transforms pricing from a challenge to a competitive advantage, helping retailers to make smarter, data-backed decisions across the entire pricing lifestyle by integrating competitive intelligence, pricing rules, and demand modeling. The goal is simple: to maximize profit, to drive growth, and to enhance customer loyalty. Our agenda: why traditional pricing methods fall short, how to isolate the true impact of price changes, a behind-the-scenes look at ClearDemand's elasticity-based modeling approach, case studies of how top grocers are driving profit and performance, and to share a proven process to measure, validate, and scale pricing strategies with confidence. Let's get started. So Steve, I understand all these factors that are challenging our retail grocers today. We've got tariffs, supply uncertainty, labor increases, people shopping in more stores and channels than ever before. Even there's dozen more challenges that they're faced with every day. If we take all those together, we bundle that up, is that what's causing all this chaos?
Phil, I think chaos is a great word for it, and you hit the nail on the head with this notion of uncertainty. There's uncertainty in terms of costs. The costs have become very dynamic again. Uncertainty in terms of tariffs, which would be another measured step up on the cost end. And we also see concurrently a lot of downward pressure from the consumer on their ability and willingness to pay a premium. And so all of those things are leading to chaos in the marketplace for grocers and challenges that frankly haven't been seen in a long time.
So if we take a look across the globe of what's going on in Europe, Asta decided to price match, lower their prices. What happened there?
Yeah, we see that happening in the US as well as overseas, where someone makes a blanket lowering of prices, usually as a response to a loss of traffic. In Asda's case, they're worried about Lidl. They're worried about Aldi. Historically, Asda was the low-priced supplier in the UK, and they've lost that mantle. And I think, frankly, they're struggling a little bit to figure out how to manage through that. Matching the prices of your lowest price competitor is rarely a path to success. It'll feel good for a while. Volumes might increase for a while. Traffic might increase for a while. It's certainly a good marketing play, but usually by the end of the quarter, you start to look at what happens to one's gross margin when you're blanket cutting prices and matching those of suppliers who can, or of retailers who can get those products on the shelf for less. And it's not the path to growth in my estimation.
Well, it brings up that old story about the hot dog cart, where there were two hot dog carts on both sides of the road. One came in, so the other guy lowered his price, then he lowered his price, and they both went out of business. So, the real takeaway is that it's easy and quick to lose money, to your point, if you're the lowest price in town. So, Sarah, I've heard you talk a lot about the pillars of pricing. Tell us about what these pillars are and why they're just so important for grocers.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so the three pillars of pricing are demand modeling, rules, and optimization. And just with the climate that we're in today, there's so many competing factors, right? Costs are going up, inflation and prices are squeezing households, and they can't afford what they used to be able to afford. So where do you find that balance, right? And you really have to have the intelligence in a tool like ClearDemand to help you make those decisions, just to your point. So you don't end up like a out of business hot dog stand that's matching every low cost grocer in your area. Where do you match them, right? How do you know? Like I mentioned, that first pillar of pricing that we're going to discuss is demand modeling. And demand modeling is what we use at ClearDemand to calculate elasticities. And elasticities, as we know, are how sensitive shoppers are to price changes on any given item, right? And this can vary by location, it can vary by zone, many different factors there. So ClearDemand's demand modeling uses historical sales, price changes, promotions, seasonality, competitive activity, many other things to produce those elasticities, just to help us get more insight, right, into what happens when you change a price. So, we know the general calculation for elasticity is just the change in price and the change in units, right? But adding to that, there's so much more there that we at ClearDemand have included in these models, right? One of those is that we're able to infer out of stocks. So if a product is out of stock and it didn't sell that day, is it because no one wanted it or because it wasn't even available? Right? Our models can infer that data without even getting that data from a retailer. And that's very important because those things are hard to track. In addition to that, we use AI and machine learning to pick up on more recent nonlinear trends. And we all know, right, the market is changing every day. Every day there's a new article about some retailer increasing price, decreasing prices. It's all over the place, right? So much chaos and uncertainty. And you really have to rely on a good demand modeling algorithm to help provide insight into what actions you should take. So first pillar, right? Second pillar of pricing is rules, right? And we all know that rules are important. Everyone wants to match their competitors. Everyone has to maintain a certain margin, right? Everyone wants to keep their products in line with their sizes, right? So I've seen this example several times, right? If you go into a grocery store and you see one of those large tubs of peanut butter and you see that two of the smaller sizes get you actually more volume. And for some reason, it costs less. So, right, as a shopper, you're thinking, man, I just got a deal here. I'm going to stock up on these small jars of peanut butter. And, you feel like you got away with something a little bit. And that retailer, though, it looks like they're not paying attention, right? It looks like they don't, understand what's going on with their products. And that's not a good look to have, right? Especially in this climate, people are very, very sensitive to price. And even just in that moment, the repercussions of those types of pricing mistakes impact your forecast, your replenishment. Now suddenly you've got 100 jars of small peanut butter and like three large ones. Not really where you want to be, right? So you want to be able to have rules that can keep those product prices in line. It's very important.
So before you
Oh, yeah.
leave the rules, how does a retailer create the rules? What role does Clear Demand have in helping them establish these rules? And to your point, with today's climate, how often should rules be updated and changed?
And in Clear Demand, we have a really great capability of what ifing, right? In general, we have something we call a base scenario here, which houses the rules for the standard system job runs every week. So I have a lot of rules in this example, but let's say I'm a category manager or I'm just somebody who wants to try out a strategy of my own. And I can go in and I can create any scenario I want. This one right here is for this webinar. And I can add my own prices and see how they will impact my current prices and also compare them back to the original scenario that we run every week. We do have a white glove approach at Clear Demand where we will help all of our retailers, help them formulate a strategy, help them develop rules and set them up in our tool. We have one of the most comprehensive rules engines on the market today where You can customize your rules to fit almost any scenario, any product location combination, reorder your rules in different priorities to emphasize or, focus more on, let's say you want to focus more on margin versus competitive. We can help you do that. And if you don't like that, we can what if and see the results of the opposite, right? I'll just show you guys a few of these rule examples that are pretty popular with our ClearDemand clients. And the first one at the top here is our MAP price. And as you may know, MAP stands for minimum advertised price. And generally retailers have these and we never want to price below them, at least on regular, right? So what we can do in ClearDemand is that instead of setting up, every SKU has a dollar amount here in the tool, we can reference a data feed that feeds us that attribute and then sets a minimum boundary at that MAP price so that you never go below it and that you never have to worry about manually updating that file. Another example here is our step rule, which just limits our price changes between a certain range. And here, this step rule is set up to where we don't take any price increases or decreases more than 15%, and we don't take any small price changes below 2%, up or down.
Steve, and looking at retailers and talking to retailers that you do every day, have you ever seen like a really stupid rule that you just shook your head at and said to this retailer, this is going to put you out of business?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a stupid rule, but I think an outdated or suboptimal rule we come across all the time. Retailers historically have managed these sets of rules on a category by category basis. I came across a retailer during the implementation process. We were looking at their rule this was enterprise wide across all the items they sold, never be priced more than 10% above a Walmart store. And, we've found that by analyzing the elasticity that Sarah was talking about, the sensitivity of shoppers to price change, the optimal price point might be matching Walmart on certain key items, and it might allow for 25% premium to Walmart on others. So having a blanket rule that puts you into a very tight box, all based on what one competitor is pricing things at, to me is a really suboptimal rule. And by the way, our software allows permissioned users to actually edit, change, introduce new aspects to rules on the fly. And so they can bring in and get rid of rules to make sure that it makes sense for today.
This KVI rule here I've created shows us setting up our CPI rules to where, let's say we never want to go above Walmart on these specific items, and we want to stay kind of close to Kroger. So what I have here is that a max CPI of 1 for Walmart is our most important competitor here. And then for Kroger, we have a more flexible range, whereas we can be between 0.9 and 1.15 of the Kroger price. So next, after that KVI CPI, we have the general grocery CPI. So again, comparing different competitors by different levels of the hierarchy. I can create rules at the grocery level, at the department category, subcategory, and product group level, just to help me really, really tune in my strategy. Last rule here is just a margin rule on nutrition bars. And this is just set up very simply. It's going to apply to the category nutrition bars, just having a 15% minimum margin there. Again, these are very customizable. We help our clients out setting these up to begin with during implementation, and we can definitely help with any strategy questions should those arise or should a strategy change.
So, Sarah, before I let you go to the third pillar, what's your rule for how often somebody should be evaluating rules?
Yeah, I think rules need to be evaluated at least quarterly, maybe even more often, given the way the environment is now and the way competition is changing. And, in Steve's example, right, I don't like the word never, right? Never go above X amount of Walmart. There's always exceptions to that rule. And you need a tool that has the insight that can show you where those exceptions are, right? Some of these rules are made to be broken. Some of them can actually hold you back. And, I think people are sometimes afraid of change and afraid to change those strategies. And at ClearDemand, we give them the insight with our what ifing and scenarios to be able to see what would happen, right? Because we provide a forecast, which is what leads me into optimization, right? That will show you what happens to your units, your profit, your revenue when you make those price changes, when you make strategy changes, and you can compare them to each other. And that is just very, very important when you're trying to reevaluate your pricing strategy. The opportunity curve. This is something unique to our system where we can just demonstrate those points in an optimization where you are operating between your max revenue and your max profit points. And then in the screen, I have the curve right here. And this straight line on the outside represents an unconstrained opportunity curve, which means this is where all your profit and revenue would land if you used optimal points without any rules. The line right below it is our constrained opportunity curve. And this shows where your opportunity lies while still satisfying the rules that are applied to your scenario. Our red dot here in the middle is where your current prices fall. So you can definitely see that as you move out into the constrained and the unconstrained opportunity curves that you're going to increase in both revenue and profit, right? Or at least trade off on them. Over here on the right, this is what we have as our profit weight selection. So I have this little cute symbol here, which represents lambda, which is our profit weight. And here you can select from many different profit weight points, which would then adjust the strategy and lean more towards revenue or profit for this category that we're looking at. So here we're at a 0.48, kind of in the middle, a balanced scenario between profit and revenue. And what we can see is that our units will increase by almost 1%, right? Our profit change will increase and our revenue will increase as well. We can see that our margin would be at 30.72%, and we would take 230 increases and 310 price decreases. So with that, if I decided to get more aggressive on price and use the full profit weighting here, I can see that I'm going to take many more price increases and fewer decreases. So conversely, if I decide to go down to fully revenue weighted, I will take 72 increases and 515 decreases. So this is just a very cool way to adjust your strategy and still stay within the optimization.
One thought on rules. Last year, we introduced a new report as part of our solution that's a cost of rules report. And Sarah's about to talk about full optimization. But what the cost of rules report does is actually quantifies from the point of optimization to the actual price recommendation. That difference is based upon your set of rules, and it will quantify that and say, do you know that you're giving up X amount of sales or margin by pricing here due to this specific rule? So it gives the basis for challenging a rule, if you will. And some of those still make total sense, and the retailer decides to leave them in place. Others, it's the basis for saying, hey, let's soften that rule so that we can take more of that margin.
And you're giving them not only intelligence but confidence to make those rules and to go forward in the future.
That's a huge part of the solution, Phil, is the confidence building aspect of providing forecasts. For before any price change is made, you see what the forecast tells you is going to happen to your unit volume, your dollar volume, and your profitability, not only for that item, but for the rest of the category. So now someone who's a merchant who's managing a desk has complete confidence to make price changes, knowing what the impact is going to be on the profitability of their business before any shopper ever sees that price.
So, Sarah, pillar number 3.
Pillar number 3, Phil, is optimization. So this is where we take those elasticities from our demand modeling and we use those to look at every price point available and calculate our maximum revenue and maximum profit at those price points. So in an optimization, we recommend a price that is between max revenue and max profit because we believe that is where the best prices are, right? Anytime you go below max revenue, you're going to lose out on both profit and revenue. And anytime you go above max profit, you're going to lose out on profit and revenue as well. So it's really just unreasonable to be in those areas. And we know people, pay attention to rules, pay attention to competition that may push you out of those. But the insight from ClearDemand is that we give you those values no matter what, right? So you can compare, just like Steve was saying in the cost of rules report, you can see where your optimal, what kind of results you would get from an optimal price versus the price that you're using and that is constrained by rules. So, what I like to recommend for our clients is that we do an optimization pretty frequently just to reevaluate your strategy. And sometimes that means loosening up those rules, maybe just put a couple really, no negative margin, no major price changes, wider parameters against competitors, run an optimization, compare that to your standard rule strategy, and let's look at the differences. And we can help them figure that out, right? Where do we increase? Where do we decrease? And how is that going to really help their business? So here's an example of our price review screen. And this is a screen where we review the results from an optimization or a rules job by item. It's very similar to Excel in its, grid-like display. There's columns, filters. You can customize the views. You can move these things around and set up different filters to really emphasize what you want to look at. So in this example, I have several coffee creamers in different zones, and I can see that for these items, our rule was impactful. So what does that mean? That means that we have our current price here on this item of $4.99, current cost of $3.20, and the system has recommended taking the price down to $4.69, and that is due to a competitive rule against Whole Foods in this case, right? So you can see that by item here in this rules subpane. So let's just go over this a little bit. So our top rule here was our step rule, right? You can see step here. And those boundaries were set at a minimum boundary of $4.20 and an upper boundary of $5.70. Since our current price already falls within those bounds, the system does not recommend a price change there. However, when it goes down to our next rule, our Whole Foods CPI rule, we can see that our boundaries have been created at $3.59 to $4.09. So that forces our price down to be in line with that competitor price. So what was that price? Let's find out, right? If we scroll down, we can see our impactful competitors here. And in this case, Whole Foods is at $4.04. But since I set this rule up to where I don't want to match exactly, I just want to get close to it, the recommended price is now $4.60.
So if I look at the three pillars and I walk into a store, and I'm seeing more examples of this, and you guys probably are as well, where, we started with buy one, get one free. We've got 10 for $10. Now I'm seeing what I think is one of the most absurd ones, and I'd like to get both your opinions on this. You buy two, you get three free. Now, I think that probably makes most shoppers happy, but what's the impact on the grocer?
I'd say I'm not sure it pleases all the shoppers. The notion of having to buy 5 of anything, whether it's a bag of chips, a 12-pack of soda. So to get, what you view as a good price, what the shopper views as a good price, means that I have to just fill up my cart, my pantry with so much product that, it may end up being a dissatisfier. And to me, it's a red flag that one's regular price isn't right.
Yeah. So totally agree, Steve. Yeah, it definitely feels like it's going to make the shopper happy, and it will in that moment, right? Oh, great. I'm getting, 5 12-packs of soda. I think that's such a good example because the regular price for soda is so different than that multiple price. And what you're actually doing is that you're training the shopper to look for those deals and to really not buy that product when it's on regular. And, let's say you buy those 5 12-packs, you run through them, and it's time to buy more. You head to the store and now they're 8. Now you're frustrated as a shopper, right? You're like, I'm not used to paying that. I am trained to be paying a much lower price per per package, right? And now I feel like I'm getting ripped off. So I'm angry and I don't really like this grocer anymore. They've given me a bad taste in my mouth. So maybe I don't want to go back. Maybe I'm going to go somewhere else that has it more consistently priced a little bit lower. And I think high low can be very, very powerful. Multiple, buy one, get ones can be very, very powerful as well. I think you just have to be careful with that.
I think you're bringing up a really important point that, if we train shoppers for certain behaviors and then, we disappoint them that they will go elsewhere or they'll go online versus going into a store. And with all the tools that they have now to compare prices, whether it's online or in store, it makes it that much more difficult for a grocer and hopefully, less reactive to what the guy down the street is doing. And just to build for a quick second on something that Steve talked about as far as quantities goes, I remember about 25 years ago doing a show on Oprah with warehouse clubs. And we took 3 audience members. We gave them each $100. We sent them into a warehouse club. They brought the product back to the studio. And I'll never forget this woman. I can picture her to this day. She was a Chicago policewoman. And, Oprah said to her, what did you buy? And she bought 100 rolls of toilet paper. And Oprah said, that's a lot of toilet paper. How long is it going to take you to go through that? So she said, well, I don't know. And then I said, well, where are you going to store it? In your garage? And she said, no, I live in a studio apartment. And needless to say, Oprah and the whole audience laughed. But to your point, at times, too much is too much. And 40% of all of our food in this country is wasted. And, it's fine if you're buying toilet paper, but if you're buying a perishable item or, just an item that has a shorter shelf life, you've got this as a problem. So, Steve, what do you think is driving these really big deals? Is it the retailer that's trying to compete? Is it the manufacturer pushing them to do it?
Yeah, it's a combination. I'm not going to let the manufacturer off the hook. Many times they're in a position where they're trying to deliver their volume goal for the quarter, and these big promotions, they may upset some shoppers like we talked about, but they do move a ton of volume, and so it helps them to achieve that quarterly goal in a sluggish retail environment today. So now let's think about it from the retailer's perspective. I think a lot of effort goes into trying to manage one's price imagery. And I think sometimes promotions, the consumer gets that moment of elation when they recognize a deal. But like Sarah described, it also comes with that moment of realization when they come back next week and it's on regular price at a price point that they frankly don't want to consider and probably won't consider. And it's one of the factors that I think is leading consumers to shop 4+ outlets on a weekly basis. Think about that, to bring in their entire requirements for a household. They're shopping more than 4 stores per week, and it's cherry picking those deals. I think getting the regular price right could go a long way toward fixing that break in loyalty and that cross shopping behavior that we're almost incentivizing as an industry.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing from you both is that there's a lot of work that's needed to fix traditional pricing in grocery. In fact, Steve, I think you told me, a few weeks ago that you still come across a lot of retailers who are doing this on spreadsheets. Why is it seemingly so hard for retailers to do, and how can they measure their success? Sarah?
Yeah, we do see and we hear a lot of retailers still working in spreadsheets. And I think it's just a conditioned behavior and it is overwhelming. And when you go to execute those prices, I think this is where it's prone to error, right? Anything manual is prone to error. And we know that, we've seen in the news, right, some recent articles about pricing mistakes that have really, put a sour taste in people's mouths. And a system like ours really helps automate those. It helps respond faster to changes in the market, to strategy changes that a client might want to implement or test out. It's a lot harder to do in Excel, right? Some of these retailers are managing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of SKUs and massive files with macros. And, one small mistake in that spreadsheet can be catastrophic.
So, you're talking about the scale of this. I would imagine having a spreadsheet for 30, 40, 50,000 items and keeping it accurate. Forget about the human error aspect of it, but keeping it accurate is a problem. So, where are they getting this data from? Are they getting it from IRI, from Nielsen? Are they sending people into stores? How are they physically collecting it now, and the potential for errors?
I was going to say a lot of retailers are managing these massive spreadsheets that are in many cases fairly elegant. They've got a lot of the right fields, including I think what you're alluding to, Phil, like competitive pricing. And so, they bring in competitive prices from other supermarkets. Oftentimes today that's scraped from the internet. But, we run across in every implementation retailers saying their costs are 6 months old. Those haven't been updated. And the comp prices are incomplete and old. And so when you're dealing with those critical factors of your cost, what the price is at the competitor down the street, if you don't have a great handle on those things, as well as those complex relationships between good, better, best, small, medium, large packages, it's going to be really hard to turn that into a reliable tool to manage 30,000 plus items on a given week.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine if in today's environment, and probably even, since the pandemic, if somebody hasn't updated their cost in 6 months, they're not doing that great of a job as a retailer. Sarah?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's I feel like it's pretty irresponsible almost at this point to not have your costs updated, especially with how much they've changed, right? Vendors have been increasing costs since, quite a bit since the pandemic. And, not having those reflected accurately, you're just not going to get the right results. And you're going to be making decisions that are based on the wrong inputs, right? So how do you handle a strategy that way when you don't have the right factors going into it?
A couple weeks ago, Site Research published a report that found that 39% of retailers said their number one problem, operational challenge, is promotion execution errors. To your point, 37% said that product pricing errors were their problem. You just alluded to that major story that came out that Consumer Reports has publicized all over the place, that Kroger inadvertently overcharged shoppers by listing expired sale prices on shelves, then charging the regular prices at the checkout, obviously getting a lot of consumers very upset. Does electronic shelf labels solve these problems? And what does that look like, Sarah?
Yeah, great question. SLs are a really interesting topic today. We're seeing more and more of them in the United States. They're very, very popular in Europe. And, my answer to that is that ESLs can help, right? But if your data going into those ESLs is incorrect, you're just going to display incorrect data on the shelf. And that's that. You may be able to fix it quicker, right? You may be able to push prices on items that don't get a lot of attention. You can test things out better, right? And you can help, help support your elasticities with more instances of price changes. So I think they're a really great tool to use. I think we'll see more of them, but I don't think they solve the problem 100%, right? You really have to have everything lined up on your back end, with the prices flowing into those ESLs in order to use them effectively.
Steve, your thought on ESLs? Look into your crystal ball.
Well, I love Sarah's answer. I mean, I think it's inevitable that ESLs are coming in a big way. When Walmart jumps in, it represents a big capital expense for a retailer. But there are many places where they have an ROI, and it's in those labor savings. It's that reduction of errors. And what we're excited about though is the ability to then take a price optimization solution, feed your ESLs with that. And one of the side benefits that not many people would realize is, let's say, pretty much in any given week, a big retailer might run an optimization in our system, and it will tell them there are 800 prices price changes recommended by the system to optimize your price across all your categories. 450 of those are price increases, 350 of those are price decreases. But with labor being what it is, there's only the capacity to change, let's call it 120 in a given week. And so that retailer will only prioritize the top 120 items, as they should, and make those price changes. The rest may never get changed until something happens that leads them to fall higher on the prioritization ranking. So with price optimization and ESLs, you can make all of those changes, even the ones that are only 10-cent price changes that yield to an improvement in your objective of whether it's driving traffic or earning more gross margin. And so you start to stack dimes on that long tail of products that got price changes because they're all now being optimized.
So elasticity, I want to go back to that, Sarah. In economics basically just refers to the degree, to your point, where there's a variable change in response to a change in another variable. So when I look at a supermarket, I can't imagine a more relevant example than selling food and beverages. Bring it to our supermarket shelves and to our shopping behaviors. Let's dig down a little bit more about elasticity and how is ClearDemand's elasticity model different than other ones that are out there?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Yeah, so elasticity is really just the sensitivity to price in any item by the shoppers that buy it, right? And it's really essential for any retailer's pricing strategy. So, you have all these competing inputs, all these things we're hearing from the market, right? Match this competitor, your costs are increasing. And what we really want to understand is, how do the shoppers respond to those price changes? Do they even care, right? A lot of people think, like in that example earlier, never go below, 10% above Walmart or something similar to that effect, right? Well, never say never, right? Because there may be a lot of shoppers in that store that really don't care or don't pay attention to Walmart. And the way you're going to understand that, the only way you're going to understand that is by using elasticities. And, you know, if I take any product, let's say, and I increase it by 10%, what do I get out of it? Do I get the profit that I'm looking for? Do I get the units that I'm looking for? It reminds me of this example that I have of a category manager where he was over some area of produce, and his goal was to achieve a certain margin, right? So he just kept a margin floor, hard floor on every item, right? Didn't budge. And then he was getting his margin, but he wasn't getting units. He wasn't getting the revenue and the profit that he wanted, right? Because he was turning people away. And he didn't have that insight into elasticity on those items. So what we did was we came in there, we ran an optimization. We looked at what items should go up and what go down. And what happened was we were still able to achieve that same margin for the category overall, but we increased our units, our profit, and our revenue by doing that, right? So that just echoes the point, right? Elasticities are essential in any pricing strategy because you have to understand how the shoppers are going to respond to those price changes. And you can't just manage to one metric.
What I'm hearing is this ultimate sophisticated loss leader model. So if I go back to, our parents and our grandparents' day, a supermarket would put milk on sale to get people to come into the store. But that was with one item. And we're talking about being able to have this intelligence on 50, 60,000 items and really be so much smarter about it. And I think to your point about consumers, we're seeing consumers getting smarter every day. They're more price conscious every day. Deals and prices are more important to them. Store brands, are up 40% of consumers saying that they're buying more store brands than ever before. It's difficult to really be able to understand what that consumer is looking for. So if I look at that model, not only the elasticity, but taking that data and being able to create a forecast
So I just ran my optimization, and in this scenario, I am optimizing for revenue. So if I look at the overall forecast summary, I can see that at my current price, I have my units, profit, revenue, and margin. I can also see my recommended prices from the system that are focused more on driving revenue. Overall, I'm gaining 3,100 units, losing a little bit of profit, and then gaining a little bit of revenue. So, with that optimization and with that opportunity curve, if this is not what I want for this category, I can adjust my strategy in the opportunity curve, or I can loosen up some of my rules if I'm maybe more concerned about losing profit here. But in this example, like I stated, we really are more focused on revenue and driving units. And then you're able to really assess what the impact is and what it will be going forward.
Steve, how do we take those three pillars and create the best forecast ever? And frankly, I'm going to put you on the spot. How is ClearDemand's forecast better than other people's or what they're doing themselves?
So it's the number one thing that's missing from retailers that are trying to do it themselves. They make price changes based on a cost change or a competitive change or a goal to move some more volume. Whatever there is driving that decision. But our forecasts are extremely precise. I think it's one of the two or three elements of ClearDemand that we do better than anyone is keep that model completely up to date and generate an accurate forecast so that when you're considering a price change, you know exactly what's going to happen to your units, to your dollars, and to your profitability, not only for that item, but across your entire category. That ability to forecast with confidence is an enormous driver. And then we go a step further, Phil. Afterwards, we'll do a value measurement analysis, or on our promotion optimization, a post promotion analysis that then compares what our forecast was to the actual. And so you've always got that basis of saying, what did I get from my investment in this software? And how is my category responding, so that the system continues to get smarter and smarter and make better recommendations so that you're always driving for incremental performance financially.
Well, Sarah, Steve, wow. Thanks for an amazing and important discussion. Being able to illuminate the challenges and the opportunities for retailers to get pricing right. And thank you to our attendees for joining us and wanting to get to the right price faster. For more information and to schedule a personalized demo for you and your complete team, just reach out to Steve at sthornberry@cleardemand.com or click on the QR code on the screen. When the market is unpredictable, as it is, your pricing strategy cannot afford to be average. That's where ClearDemand comes in. Thanks for joining us.